This is beautiful.
So beautiful.
In the vast, wild expanse of the North Cascades, a Washington couple, out for a casual one-night camping trip, simply vanished. Investigators would find nothing but their secured vehicle before the trail dissolved into the wilderness. And for 4 long years, their file sat dormant, a cold case gathering dust with no new leads. The mystery would finally break open in a forest miles from the initial search, where a logger was attempting to haul an old rusted wood chipper from a remote track. The machine's contents, dislodged by the movement, would take the investigation in a completely new and horrifying direction. But the first sign that the routine rhythm of the Cugman household had ceased was far more ordinary, an accumulation of mail spilling from an aluminum box. The date was September 18th, 2015. Tieran Klugman stood on the front porch of his parents' home, a modest single-story house on the outskirts of Seattle. He was there for their weekly coffee, a cherished tradition they rarely missed. But a silence hung over the property that felt heavy, unnatural. Tieran knocked, then rang the doorbell. Only silence answered. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He called his mother Deline, then his father Rorik. Both calls went straight to voicemail. His parents, Rorik, 57, and Deline, 58, were creatures of habit, their lives governed by the predictable routines of retirement. This was not like them. His fingers fumbled for the spare key, the one always kept under a ceramic frog by the door. As he turned the lock and pushed the door open, the atmosphere inside the house rushed out to meet him. It wasn't just the stale air of an empty home. It was an assault, an overwhelming, suffocating stench of animal waste so potent it made his eyes water and burn. Tieran took a single step into the living room and froze. The house looked as if a localized hurricane, a whirlwind of pure chaos had torn through it. He stepped into a scene of utter devastation. Furniture was overturned, not just knocked, but thrown. The sofa cushions had been savaged, their foam stuffing strewn across the carpet like a bizarre, toxic snowfall. Vicious claw marks scarred the wooden door frames, testament to a desperate frenzy. The carpet itself was a ruin, soiled beyond recognition. "Mom? Dad?" Tieran called out, his own voice sounding strained and hollow in the wreckage of the home. He navigated the chaos, his mind struggling to process the contradictory clues. It had the violence of a break-in, yet the expensive television was still mounted on the wall. Through the bedroom door, he could see his mother's jewelry box, sitting untouched on the dresser. This wasn't a robbery. This was something else. And then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the heavy silence. A faint, pathetic scratching from the back of the house. He followed the sound, his heart pounding against his ribs, until he stood before the utility room door. The wood around the bottom was splintered and gouged, clawed away by a desperate, trapped animal. He turned the handle and swung the door open. Huddled in a dark corner on a soiled and tattered blanket was the family's golden retriever, Sunny. But the creature that lifted its head was only a ghost of the animal he knew. Sunny was emaciated, his ribs a sharp lattice beneath a coat of matted fur. He was dehydrated to the point of delirium, his movements weak and unsteady. The water bowl nearby was bone dry, its metal surface coated in a fine layer of dust, a silent testament to a long and desperate thirst. That sight, the sight of their beloved dying dog, shattered Tieran's confusion and replaced it with a wave of pure, ice-cold terror. Rorik and Deline adored Sunny. They loved him like a child. The idea that they would abandon him, lock him in a room without food or water, was more than just unlikely. It was inconceivable. It defied the very nature of who they were. The dog's condition, the house's destruction from the inside, it could only mean one thing. They hadn't just left. Something catastrophic had prevented them from ever coming home. Based on the dog's horrific state, Tieran guessed they had been gone for at least a week. His fingers, numb and clumsy, found his phone and dialed 911. Within the hour, the quiet suburban house was transformed into an active crime scene, its silence broken by the crackle of police radios. Reeling from the shock, Tieran began to piece together the timeline for the authorities, starting with the last time he knew everything was okay. His parents had planned a short trip beginning on September 11th. Exactly 1 week prior, on September 11th, they had set off for a one-night camping excursion in North Cascades National Park. It was meant to be a simple getaway. While Rurik and Deline loved the outdoors, they were enthusiasts, not survivalists, preferring day hikes and well-maintained campsites. This trip was supposed to be easy. Drive up, camp, hike a familiar trail, and be home the next day. As the official investigation spun into motion, the cold calculus of procedure took over. Investigators began the painstaking work of piecing together the couple's lives. Tieran endured the grim formality of compiling his parents' medical histories and providing their dental records, routine steps in any long-term missing persons case, taken in the chilling hope that a body might one day need to be identified. While searching the home for maps or notes, detectives delved into Rurik's digital world. In his cloud storage account, they found it, the last known evidence of Rurik and Deline Klugman. It was a photograph, a selfie, uploaded and time-stamped on the afternoon of September 11th. The image captured a moment of pure, quiet happiness, frozen in time. The sun was bright, illuminating a brilliant, cloudless blue sky framed by the towering pines of the North Cascades. Rurik was on the left, his head tilted affectionately toward Deline, his sunglasses pushed back into his dark hair. Strapped to his back was a vibrant orange backpack. Deline, her blonde hair slightly windswept, was smiling broadly, a bright red jacket standing out against the forest green, a delicate silver-beaded necklace at her throat. The photo's metadata told the final story. It had synced to the cloud just moments before their phones were swallowed by the vast, rugged wilderness, losing service forever. They had arrived. They were happy. And then they were gone. The North Cascades National Park Complex is a breathtaking and brutal expanse of wilderness. It sprawls over 684,000 acres of jagged peaks, deep valleys, and dense ancient forests, crowned with more than 300 glaciers. It is a place of profound beauty and of profound, indifferent danger. For search and rescue teams, it is a logistical nightmare. The mobilization to find Rurik and Deline was massive. By September 19th, teams from multiple counties, park rangers, and specialized volunteer groups were converging on the area, but they were fighting a losing battle from the start. The Klugmans had a 7-day head start. Any scent trails the dogs could have followed had been scoured from the earth by time and weather. Any footprints had been washed away by intermittent rain. The search area was, in effect, the entire park. The first critical objective was to find their vehicle. For nearly 48 exhaustive hours, park rangers systematically checked every trailhead, parking lot, and scenic overlook. Finally, they found it. The discovery was the first solid anchor in a sea of uncertainty, but it offered frustratingly few answers. The car was locked and secured. Inside, everything was unnervingly normal. Snacks in the console, water bottles in their holders. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry, no hint of distress. It looked exactly as you would expect, the quiet, waiting vehicle of two people who had simply geared up and headed out for a hike. With the trailhead now established as ground zero, the search began in earnest. Teams fanned out along the Thunder Creek Trail, a relatively flat, well-maintained path that follows a winding creek deep into the valley, a trail perfectly suited to the Klugmans' casual style. The Thunder Creek Trail was the most logical route, and so it became the epicenter of the search. K-9 units were deployed, their handlers holding little hope that any scent could have survived the elements for so long. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras roared low over the canopy, their sensors scanning for any signature of life, any anomaly, in the cold green expanse below. Days bled into a week. The searchers, a small army of dedicated souls, battled exhaustion and treacherous terrain. A grim realization began to settle over the command post. They were looking for a needle in a haystack the size of a mountain range. In a wilderness this vast, the margins for survival are razor thin, and they shrink with every passing hour. Tyrion remained at the command post, a ghost haunting the edge of the operation, living in an agonizing limbo between hope and despair. He recounted every detail he could remember about his parents' gear, clinging to one specific image, the vibrant orange of his father's backpack, praying it might serve as a beacon against the gray rock and dark timber. And then, a break. A backpacker who had been hiking in a remote area several miles from the established search grid contacted the command post. While reviewing photos from his trip, he had spotted something. A tiny detail, almost lost in the grand scale of the landscape. Far in the distance, high above the valley floor, he had captured a flash of bright orange fabric deep within a treacherous scree field. The location was a scar of loose rock and debris on a steep, unstable slope, far from any established trail. It was not a place for casual day hikers. It was a place you ended up by accident, through disorientation or disaster. But it was a lead, the only one they had. The report galvanized the command post. A specialized high-angle rescue team was immediately assembled. The mission to reach the orange object was inherently dangerous. The scree field was a volatile, shifting slope, prone to sudden rockfalls, and the weather was already beginning to turn. The team began the arduous ascent. This wasn't hiking, it was technical climbing, a slow and deliberate battle against gravity and unstable ground. They moved with methodical precision, securing ropes and testing each foothold. The tension was palpable, hanging heavy in the thin mountain air. With every dislodged stone that skittered down the slope into the valley below, they were reminded of how easily this place could swallow a person whole. They were climbing into the heart of the mystery, toward a small patch of orange that held the promise of an answer, or of a far more terrible truth. Every dislodged rock that clattered down the slope echoed like a gunshot through the silent valley. From the command post, observers watched the team through high-powered binoculars, tiny figures moving against an immense wall of gray. The radio crackled with terse updates on their slow, painstaking progress. It took them nearly 6 hours to reach the location. They approached the patch of orange with a cautious reverence, the anticipation of physical pressure in their chests. This could be it. The key. The first piece of a puzzle that might finally explain what happened to Rorik and Deline Klugman. The team leader knelt beside the object and keyed his radio. The voice that crackled back to the command post was flat, stripped of all excitement. Heavy with deflation. The orange fabric was not a backpack. It was an old, weathered piece of climbing gear, a faded sling webbing, likely abandoned years ago, its bright color a cruel trick of the light. The disappointment was a palpable, crushing force. The mountain had dangled a thread of hope only to reveal it was nothing more than a ghost. The risky, exhausting operation had yielded nothing. As the active search scaled back, defeated by the lack of leads and the approach of winter, the questions only grew louder. If they were lost, why was there no sign? No dropped gear, no makeshift shelter, no trace at all. With the wilderness refusing to yield its secrets, the investigation turned inward, away from the mountains and into the quiet suburban life of the Klugmans. Detectives began a deeper dive, looking for any fissure beneath the surface of their happy retirement. They were, by all accounts, a quiet couple, well-liked and financially stable, with no known enemies. But one event stood out. Tyrion revealed that Rorik, a highly skilled machine technician, had recently lost his job at Van Camp Industries, a local plant specializing in heavy industrial equipment. Rorik had downplayed it, telling his family the company was simply downsizing. He'd accepted a severance package, framing it as a welcome early retirement. He had seemed, if anything, optimistic. Investigators chased the new lead. Had the job loss caused more stress than he let on? Had it led to a dispute, a suicide pact, or an intentional disappearance? The theories were dark whispers, but they didn't align with the melody of the couple's life. Their finances were secure. Their friends insisted their devotion to one another was absolute. As a matter of routine, detectives interviewed Rorick's former employer, Oswin Van Camp. He was cooperative, professional, and expressed his sincere concern. He met them in his office and confirmed Rorick's layoff was a standard cost-cutting measure, describing his former employee as reliable and their parting as amicable. The interview was a perfect sealed box with no loose ends. Van Camp was a closed door, polite and impenetrable.
The lead fizzled out. With no evidence of foul play and no trace of the couple, the case stalled. The prevailing theory hardened into a sad, simple story. Rorick and Deline had succumbed to the elements, their bodies lost forever in the vastness of the Cascades. Winter arrived, burying the park under a deep shroud of snow, and the active search was officially suspended. The case went cold. The years that followed offered no answers, only the slow, grinding ache of uncertainty. For Tieran, life became a state suspended between grief and hope. The ravaged house was eventually cleaned and repaired. Sonny, the golden retriever, was slowly nursed back to health, a living reminder of the moment everything went wrong. But the absence of his parents remained a gaping wound. The case file sat dormant, another mystery swallowed by the Washington wilderness. Then came the summer of 2019, nearly 4 years after the Kludmans walked away from their Subaru. The world had moved on. The memory of the massive search had faded. Brody Husted was a contract logger, a man accustomed to the solitude and hard labor of the deep woods. He was working not in the national park but in an adjacent section of national forest, a dense, remote area of steep slopes and tangled undergrowth. His job was mundane, grueling work, clearing debris from the network of decommissioned logging roads. He spent his days navigating the forgotten tracks in his heavy-duty flatbed, its powerful winch a tool for hauling deadfall and obstacles out of the way. He was simply there to clear a path. He had no idea he was about to clear a path straight into the dark heart of a 4-year-old mystery. The air was a thick cocktail of pine, damp earth, and diesel fumes, the scent of hard labor in a place the world had forgotten. Brody Husted was clearing a particularly overgrown section of road, a narrow track so dense with vegetation it was cast in a perpetual, gloomy shadow. He maneuvered his truck around a sharp bend, and it was there, half swallowed by the undergrowth, that he saw it. A hulking shape of wrongness in the sea of green and brown. A portable wood chipper. Abandoned. Forgotten. He stopped the truck and got out. The machine was tilted at an awkward angle, its wheels half sunk in the soft, dark earth as if the forest was slowly digesting it. Its paint, once a bright industrial orange, was now a faded ghost, peeling away to reveal leprous patches of rust and grime. It looked inoperable, a piece of junk left behind by a logging crew years ago. It was an eyesore, and technically it was debris he was contracted to remove. He considered leaving it. But Husted took a quiet pride in his work. He wouldn't leave a job half done. He was alone out there. He unspooled the heavy winch cable, dragged it through the mud, and secured it around the chipper's rusted frame. He engaged the winch, and the motor strained, its whine deepening as it fought the suction of the mud and the dead weight of the machine. The chipper groaned in protest, the rusted metal shrieking as it was torn from a grave it had occupied for years. After several attempts, he finally hauled it onto the access road. The next challenge was getting it onto his flatbed. He backed the truck up, reattached the cable, and began to lift. The cable went taut. The front of the wood chipper rose from the ground, swinging precariously in the humid air. As the chipper reached its apex, it tilted sharply upward, the angle becoming nearly vertical. The sudden, violent movement shifted the machine's long, undisturbed contents. Deep within the rusted feeding chute, compacted material, lodged in the mechanism for years, finally broke free.
A dark, compacted clump of debris fell from the chute, landing with a soft thud on the muddy ground by Husted's boots. He glanced down, expecting nothing more than a foul pulp of wood, leaves, and dirt. But what he saw made no sense. He knelt, poking at the dark mass with a stick. It wasn't just organic decay. He could see small, dense, hard fragments mixed into the compacted filth. Husted felt a sudden, profound chill. A coldness that had nothing to do with the damp forest air. This wasn't right. He reached a gloved hand into the feeding chute, probing deeper, and pulled out another handful of the material. Embedded within it were more of the small, hard objects. Objects that were disturbingly, horribly familiar. He stood up, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was a logger, not a forensic expert, but he knew the wilderness. He knew the look and feel of decay, and this was different. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. This machine hadn't just been used to chip wood. Husted stopped everything. He left the wood chipper hanging in the air, a monstrous pendulum suspended between the truck and the ground. His hands shook as he climbed back into the cab and radioed his base, reporting an unusual discovery. He didn't need to explain his suspicions. The urgency in his voice was enough. He requested immediate contact with the state police. The discovery of a rusted machine deep in the wilderness had just cracked the cold case of Rorik and Deline Klugman wide open. The response was swift. The forgotten road, silent for years, was suddenly transformed into a major crime scene. State police and forensic teams descended on the location, their vehicles navigating the difficult terrain to the spot where a rusted wood chipper still hung from its winch, waiting to give up the last of its terrible secrets. The forgotten logging road was transformed. Where there had been only silence, there was now the quiet hum of a major crime scene. The perimeter was marked with yellow tape, a stark, artificial boundary against the wildness of the forest. And at its center, coated in rust and grime, the wood chipper sat as the monstrous centerpiece of the investigation. Forensic teams began their grim, methodical work. First, they carefully documented and collected the clump of material that had fallen by Brody Husted's boots, photographing every fragment before sealing it as evidence. Then they turned to the machine itself, beginning the arduous process of dismantling it, piece by piece. It quickly became clear this was no ordinary piece of abandoned equipment. Embedded within the mechanism, compacted into crevices and coating the blades, were unmistakable traces of biological material. The horror, they soon discovered, was not contained to the machine. Investigators realized that the violent action of the chipper would have sprayed debris far and wide. The ground where the machine had rested for 4 years became a new focus. On their hands and knees, in a slow, grueling search, they began to sift the very earth, screening the soil through fine mesh, looking for anything that didn't belong. The work continued for days, and what they found was horrifying. Scattered in the soil and leaf litter, tangled in the roots of plants, were highly fragmented human remains. The level of destruction was extreme. The mechanical violence of the chipper compounded by 4 years of decay. The state crime lab confirmed their worst fears. The remains were human. The critical question now was who? Forensic anthropologists faced a near impossible task. The remains were too fragmented, too degraded. They noted with alarm that the total volume recovered was terrifyingly small, not nearly enough to account for a single adult. It suggested a calculated, horrific disposal meant to erase an identity completely, with the rest of the bodies hidden elsewhere. They tried to extract DNA, but the samples were too compromised, hopelessly contaminated by the environment and the rusted metal. The investigation had hit a wall. They had proof of a brutal homicide, but no victim. Forced back to the scene, they expanded the search, this time with metal detectors, hoping something inorganic had survived. The detectors pinged on old nails and shell casings, but then, deep in the soil, one registered a strong, clear signal. Carefully, they excavated the spot and unearthed a small metallic object. It was a piece of dental work, a uniquely crafted silver inlay. It was a critical discovery, a tiny piece of permanence in a world of decay.
Given the location, investigators immediately pulled the cold case file for Rorik and Deline Klugman. A forensic odontologist was brought in. Deline's records were a dead end, but then he turned to Rorik's. The charts contained meticulous notes from his dentist, documenting the unique craftsmanship and specific metallurgical composition of a silver inlay he'd received years earlier. The odontologist compared the recovered piece to those detailed diagrams, the precise curvature, the unique tooling marks, the alloy itself. The match was positive. The silver inlay belonged to Rorik Klugman. The discovery was definitive proof of his fate. He was the victim of a brutal homicide, his remains partially destroyed in the wood chipper. The missing persons case was now officially a murder investigation, haunted by the new mystery. Where was the rest of Rorik? And what had happened to Deline? The news hit Tieran with the finality of a death sentence. The agonizing uncertainty of the past 4 years was replaced by the horrific, concrete reality of that machine. The brutality of it all suggested a level of calculation that was deeply personal, an act designed to erase his parents from the earth. Sad, devastated, but driven by a desperate need for answers, Tieran began his own investigation, focusing on the one anomaly he knew: his father's job loss. What if it wasn't just an early retirement? Thoughtful. What if it was the key? He spent weeks sifting through his parents' financial records, looking for anything, a hidden debt, a sign of distress. Instead, he found the opposite. Buried in the bank statements from the week before they vanished, Tieran discovered a massive anomaly. A single cash withdrawal made by his father for $50,000. Surprised. The number stunned him. His parents were frugal. They didn't deal in cash. A sum like that was completely out of character, representing a huge portion of their savings. The money wasn't in the house. It hadn't been deposited elsewhere. Like his parents, it had simply vanished. The discovery raised a host of alarming new questions. Was it a payoff? Blackmail? Had his quiet, unassuming father been involved in something illegal? Tieran refused to believe it. But as he stared at the impossible number on the page, he knew one thing for certain. The quiet life his parents had presented to the world was a lie. And the truth of why they died was hidden somewhere in the secret they took with them into the North Cascades. Tieran now had a focus for his grief and anger: Van Camp Industries. He began contacting his father's former colleagues, men Rorik had worked alongside for decades. He was met with a wall of polite, impenetrable silence. They expressed sympathy, but the moment the conversation turned to Van Camp, a chill entered their voices. They spoke in hushed tones, their words laced with a palpable fear of retaliation, of losing their own jobs. No one would talk about Oswin Van Camp. It was a conspiracy of silence, and it only fueled Tieran's conviction that his father's death was born in the secrets of that company. He intensified his efforts, poring over his father's old work files, consumed by the investigation. Then, the pressure escalated. He returned to his apartment one evening to a feeling of profound wrongness. The air was disturbed. The boxes of his father's documents had been rifled through, not ransacked, but searched with a quiet precision. Nothing of value was stolen. It wasn't a burglary. It was a message. We know what you're looking for. The police dismissed it, but Tieran knew better. He was no longer just investigating a cold case. He was in a direct confrontation with something dark and dangerous. A few days later, that confrontation turned violent. In the dim, echoing quiet of his apartment's underground parking garage,
A large figure materialized from the shadows. The attack was swift and brutal. The man slammed Tieran against his car, the impact stealing the air from his lungs. He leaned in close, his voice a low, menacing whisper. "Stop digging." Tieran struggled, but he was overpowered. A series of punishing blows sent him crumpling to the concrete floor. The man stood over him, his expression a mask of cold detachment. "The files. Where are they?" he demanded. When Tieran refused to answer, a final brutal kick drove the point home. "This is your only warning. Stop digging into Van Camp business, or you'll end up like your old man." The threat, explicit and chilling, hung in the air. Then the man was gone, his footsteps echoing into the shadows. Lying on the cold concrete, bruised and shaken, Tieran felt not just pain, but a surge of grim validation. This was the confirmation he needed. The assault forced the police to finally acknowledge what he had suspected all along. Rorik Klugman's job was inextricably linked to his murder. The case exploded. It was no longer a localized homicide. It was a potential conspiracy, drawing in the specialized expertise of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The focus shifted intensely onto Oswin Van Camp. The FBI launched a comprehensive forensic audit of Van Camp Industries, a monumental task of sifting through years of complex financial records. They were hunting for the source of the fear that kept an entire company silent. The breakthrough came from the insurance claims. Accountants uncovered a pattern. Over the past decade, Van Camp had filed an unusually high number of multi-million-dollar claims for expensive machinery reported as damaged or stolen. On the surface, the paperwork was perfect. But when the FBI cross-referenced the serial numbers, they uncovered an elaborate shell game. The machinery wasn't gone. Van Camp would collect the massive insurance payout, then move the lost equipment off the books to a network of shell corporations and hidden warehouses, where it was resold on the black market or used for off-the-books jobs. The scale of the fraud was staggering. Thoughtful. Suddenly, everything made sense. Rorik Klugman, the lead machine technician, was the one man who would have known. He would have seen the phantom equipment in the logs, the numbers that didn't add up. He was uniquely positioned to expose the entire criminal enterprise. And the $50,000 withdrawal? Short pause. It was no longer a mystery. It was the price of silence. Hush money, a blackmail payment from a man who had discovered a crime and a desperate attempt by a criminal to cover his tracks. When it didn't work, a more permanent solution was required. The motive was now crystal clear. Rorik posed an existential threat to Oswin Van Camp's empire. With the fraud uncovered, the investigation had its why. Now it turned to the final question. Who? They needed to find the accomplice, the shadowy figure from the parking garage, the muscle behind Van Camp's operation. The hunt began for a man with a reputation for intimidation, someone fiercely loyal to his boss. They started circulating a name. Jory. A name began to surface again and again in the investigation. Jory Pasternak. He was Van Camp's former security foreman, known less formally as the company's enforcer. With a history of violence and a fierce loyalty to his boss, he had left the company shortly after Rorik's dismissal. When investigators located him, he was a perfect match for the man from the garage, tall, broad-shouldered, intimidating. Presented with a photo lineup, Tieran's identification was immediate and absolute. The net was closing. The key to linking the fraud to the homicide lay hidden in the physical world, in the shell corporations and the secret warehouses. The FBI's financial trail led them to a large, unmarked warehouse in a remote industrial park south of Seattle. A surveillance team was deployed. For days they watched the dormant building. Then, late one evening, movement. A luxury sedan, followed by a large panel truck. The drivers were identified, Oswin Van Camp and Jory Pasternak. The lights inside the warehouse flickered on. The team listened as the sounds of heavy machinery echoed from within. They were moving the evidence, attempting to erase the physical proof of their criminal enterprise. The time had come to act. The mobilization was swift and overwhelming. Under the cover of darkness, FBI tactical teams and state police SWAT units converged on the industrial park, locking down the perimeter. Van Camp and Pasternak had no idea they were surrounded. The order was given firmly, "Execute!" The silence of the night was shattered by the explosion of breaching charges. The main door was blown off its hinges as teams flooded into the vast, dimly lit interior. The entry achieved complete surprise. Van Camp, holding a clipboard, froze in the face of the sudden chaos. Pasternak, at the controls of a forklift, reacted with instinctive aggression, swinging the heavy machine around in a futile attempt to block the advance. The standoff was tense but brief. Outmaneuvered and surrounded, he surrendered. Van Camp, making a desperate bolt for a side office, was intercepted and apprehended. The warehouse was secure. The scene inside was overwhelming, a graveyard of lost machinery. Rows upon rows of excavators, bulldozers, and specialized tools filled the space, the physical proof of a multi-million-dollar fraud. Investigators immediately identified equipment that Rurik Klugman had personally maintained. Equipment reported stolen years before his murder. The connection was cemented. In handcuffs, Oswin Van Camp remained arrogant and defiant, demanding his lawyers and claiming it was all a clerical error. Jory Pasternak, however, was different. Isolated from his boss in the sterile quiet of an interrogation room, the enforcer's bravado began to crumble. Investigators laid out the evidence, piece by damning piece, the fraud, the assault, the surveillance footage. They made it clear that Van Camp, faced with the prospect of life imprisonment for a double homicide, his loyalty evaporated. He requested a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would tell them everything. Jory Pasternak's confession unspooled the final, horrifying chapter of the Klugman mystery. He confirmed Rurik had discovered the insurance fraud and confronted Van Camp. The $50,000 payment wasn't severance, it was hush money, accompanied by a threat. When Van Camp became convinced Rurik would eventually talk, he ordered him eliminated. They followed the couple to the North Cascades, ambushing them at their Thunder Creek campsite late that night. Pasternak confessed they transported the bodies for hours to an old, dilapidated warehouse. There they committed a gruesome task, dismembering the bodies to prevent identification. The main torsos and limbs were dumped into a deep, abandoned mine shaft in the Cascade foothills. Pasternak was then tasked with disposing of the identifying parts separately. Driving the remote logging roads, he stumbled upon the old abandoned wood chipper. Seeing a horrific opportunity, he managed to get the engine running and spent the rest of the night processing the partial remains, believing the machine would erase their identities forever. He left the chipper where he found it, confident the crime was untraceable. Pasternak's confession sealed their fates, confirming Deline had been murdered alongside her husband, though the majority of their remains would never be recovered. In late 2020, Oswin Van Camp, despite maintaining his innocence to the end, was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and massive fraud. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jory Pasternak, for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence but would still spend decades behind bars. The 4-year mystery was finally solved, though the Cascade Mountains would never give up all their secrets.